Welcome to the second episode of How Dare I Criticize Revenge of the Sith, where I won't be criticizing it enough for most of you. Now, we're going to talk about structure, and you're going to like it. Any Star Wars movie you can map onto the hero's journey and go, oh yeah, that's the plot of the movie. And people love to do it because it always works, because they were intentionally written around that structure. But you have to really fuck up the timeline to get it to fit Revenge of the Sith. And there's a reason for that. It's not actually based on the hero's journey. It's based on ancient Greek and Shakespearean tragedy, where you have two halves with a pivot in the middle. You have mounting dread, a pivot, and then a fall to catastrophe. Now, a clever modern way to do this is where you combine tragedy structure with a bait and switch. This movie still has 3 acts. The first half of it plays out pretty traditionally, but then it hits that midpoint and goes, no, fuck you, tragedy. So one of the secret functions of that opening action sequence is it acts as a misdirect. It basically has the structure of the movie as a whole, just compressed into the first 20 minutes. But what it does differently is it keeps the tone light and fun throughout. It still builds to a dark pivot in the middle, but then after that it goes back to jokey fun, to sort of tap into your subconscious and go, you know, even though this movie's obviously gonna end badly, maybe it's gonna be a fun adventure. So when we do reach that midpoint and the tone does abruptly pivot, it hits that much harder. Now, this Count Dooku fight is probably the jankiest bit of action in the entire movie. There's some great effects work and choreography, but it just doesn't quite come together. I think because Christopher Lee wasn't even there on that day, all of his stuff was shot separately. It's all shot in a way that's optimal for a digital double or head replacement, which isn't necessarily the most optimal way for it to be any good. And there was a bit of a miscommunication on set, and George Lucas thought that these effects shots were going to be a lot easier to do than they were. So I believe it was further trimmed down in editing because of that. And if you ever wondered why the Emperor kills like 5 Jedi in 3 seconds, that's the same reason. And not because he had the most force powers or whatever you thought. The digital doubles do stick out a bit, and with a bit of a deepfake, we could definitely fix that. But I don't care. It's not the sort of thing that impacts the movie, actually. What I will do is get this to flow a little better. I'll just cut it down, spend less time on some of those close-ups. There's some stuff with the Emperor here where he's being hammy and obviously evil, which is fine, he's obviously evil. But I think it plays better to have it a bit more subtle. There's this shot that was added for continuity to hide the fact that they cut a piece out. And this is something that I found on Attack of the Clones as well, where the pickup shots act as a bridge between 2 shots. But they end up hurting the pace more than they help the continuity. So I'm just gonna rework this, and not only does it flow better, but you do not fucking notice at all. I think Anakin killing Dooku should be the most tense, jarring moment of the movie. And it basically is. But let's punch it up a little. I'll start by removing a couple of lines of dialogue here towards the end, and that adds tension. I've added a slight zoom, which is a cheap trick to make something seem a bit more dramatic, but it's used throughout the prequels, and it's used even in the shot immediately before this one, so I'm allowed. In the music, there's this little timpani build, which is great, but I think it telegraphs what's going to happen a little too obviously. You know exactly when Anakin's going to decapitate Dooku just by listening to the music, which isn't a John Williams problem, that's a mixing problem.
Kill him now.
So I'm just going to quieten it down slightly and extend it out a bit, so it's a more gradual build that suddenly crescendos, so when it actually hits, it's a little shocking. Now, people hate this crash landing scene. And I'm going to be real with you here. I do not get that at all. It seems fine to me. So, but let's take a look. Of course, there's a couple beats that are slightly too long, so let's tidy those up. Anakin says this thing twice in the same sentence, which is bad writing. People generally avoid saying the same phrase twice in the same phrase. It's a confusing way of constructing sentences. But I'm not going to do anything about it. It's all shot very leisurely. You know, there's no stakes to it, which I believe is intentional and working. We need to come from that opening action sequence and go into an hour of talking. So this is the bridge that de-escalates us into that. They knock over a control tower, but who gives a shit? Then Obi-Wan's line, another happy landing, gets a bit of hate for being extremely on the nose. Now, I understand there's been a bit of a breakdown of trust between the writer and the audience, but he obviously doesn't mean that literally. But I think people are identifying a problem. There is something wrong here. There's this boom in, which is a very stylistic, unconventional shot for Star Wars, and it's probably the most gratuitous shot of the digital doubles. But I don't care about that either. What I do think is that we hold on it for a little too long and cut in a little too soon. So that's all I'm changing. And it could very well fix this scene for you. I think it's very easy to underestimate the effect that a slight timing can have on your overall enjoyment. You can try this. Try adding a half-second pause before every sentence you say, and you'll notice that conversation starts to go horribly wrong. And in editing, it's very easy to add an unnatural pause. And whenever you do, you're creating a jarring effect. It doesn't happen that often in Revenge of the Sith, but I think almost every time it does happen, it's within a few seconds of a line from the movie that's become a meme. So the timing is pulling people out of the movie enough to laugh at it. Now, the last time I saw Revenge of the Sith, I would have been a teenager, and I remember thinking it was tolerable. When I sat down to watch it for this, I actually found it really emotional and good, like a complete tit. The heart of this movie is Anakin and Padme. It's about Anakin trying not to lose Padme, and in the process, he makes a deal with the devil. That's the movie. It's a little wider than that, actually, but we're not going to get into that in this one. Just for now, it's a tragedy about Anakin and Padme. Now, a big problem with that is if you don't care about Anakin and Padme, the movie doesn't work. And this movie doesn't really give you any reasons to care. Though fortunately, it doesn't give you any reasons not to. I think the reason I cared when I rewatched this is because I've now spent hours of my life trying to get Anakin and Padme to work. Now obviously that doesn't apply to you, but what it tells me is that if you are invested in Anakin and Padme, the movie does work. So, you know, you'll just have to watch my Attack of the Clones edit. So the moment we meet them, they immediately launch into a quick recap of how their relationship is forbidden by the Jedi, which is quite clunky and it sucks, but it's here for expositional purposes. You know, that's really the key fact that we need to know about their relationship, and it's tricky because on a script level, you know, you need to tell the audience that right away, and because of the fact itself, they're the only characters who can do it. So you could remove the entire forbidden love through line, but really on Attack of the Clones I got that working to be the singular tension of their relationship, and remember, it is the heart of this movie. So another option is to just remove a couple of lines of dialogue here and create an expositional hole where there's information that the audience needs to know at the top of the movie, but we don't tell them it at the top of the movie. So that's a big problem, but it's what I'm going to do, and fortunately you probably wouldn't realize that's a problem if you didn't hear me say that, and because you did hear me say that, it's not a problem. Oh, that's annoying, isn't it? When Padme tells Anakin she's pregnant, he has this weird negative reaction, which is again here for expositional purposes. We're being told that this puts Anakin in a tough situation, but that gets brought up later, and I think it plays a lot better to have this as subtext. I'm leaving a beat here, so there's still a little ambiguity, but if Anakin is genuinely, unconditionally happy about the baby, it actually makes it more tragic later on, and it deepens his internal conflict. Then we have one little scene of them happy together, which is great. No, I think it's fine. It's working really well, actually. It's got a job to do, and it's doing it. I'll tighten some timing. But really, after the inciting incident, I don't touch the Anakin and Padme stuff at all. Actually, hang on. The actual inciting incident of the movie is the death of Count Dooku. That sets off a series of events that leads to the creation of Darth Vader. I'm not talking about that. You don't realize that that's the inciting incident for most of the movie. You may never realize it. Even now, you're still going, no, that's not. It is, but for the audience and for Anakin, the real inciting incident is when he has a nightmare that Padme dies in childbirth. That sets off, you know, that's when the plot of the movie starts. But before that, we cut to General Grievous arriving on Utapau. And this is a classic scene, right? We've all seen this before. Cut to the bad guys. our evil plan is coming together, and that raises the stakes. Cool. And it's nice and subversive, because the existence of General Grievous is bait. He's not real, remember. It's set up like he's going to be the villain that they fight at the end, and obviously he isn't. He just sort of dies right before the pivot. Not an accident. He dies as we leave that sort of movie and go into a tragedy. But it's only been 8 minutes since we last saw General Grievous, and we won't see him again for another half hour. All of the exposition in this scene is about stuff that will happen in at least half an hour's time. And it's just quite jarring and early for a scene like this. It was always here in the script, but I think the audience really needs that emotional hook of Anakin's nightmare before the plotting kicks in. And it ends with the Emperor going, "Soon I will have a new apprentice," which has the effect of filling whatever the following scene is with a sense of dread. Right now, that scene is Anakin and Padme happy on the balcony, which is the one scene in the movie that we don't want any extra dread in. So let's look at where we can move this. Anakin has his nightmare, whines to Padme, whines to Yoda. Obi-Wan tells him to go see the Emperor. The Emperor tells him he's on the Jedi Council. The Jedi go, "What the fuck? By the way, has anyone seen General Grievous?" Obi-Wan tells Anakin to spy on the Emperor. Anakin whines to Padme. The Emperor gives us his backstory and tells Anakin where Grievous is. Anakin tells the Council, and Obi-Wan leaves to go do a fight. So I tried it between every one of those scenes. Logically, it should fit well in the beginning somewhere, but I found those first few scenes actually flow so much better without it. And if you want to have this mounting dread slowly building over the course of your movie, a good way to do that is by not blowing your load right out the gate. So I think it makes a lot of sense to put it before the Jedi Council scene in terms of pace, tone, plot, structure. You know, it all fits perfectly. Unfortunately, it ruins the Jedi Council scene and this scene and the preceding scene because it fits so perfectly, it feels ludicrously on the nose. Once we go past that point, the scene starts to change in meaning. Now, instead of the dramatic irony of knowing where Grievous is before the characters do, we're placed into the character's shoes. We get the mystery of where is General Grievous before we get the reveal. So it adds to that feeling of a hidden threat. It helps the audience to invest in the plotting, but of course that comes at the cost of some setup. Now, we could even push it as far into the movie as before or after the Darth Plagueis scene. Originally, the Emperor telling Grievous to move to Mustafar and the Emperor telling Anakin Grievous was on Utapau were random facts separated by 40 minutes that you're just going to forget about over the course of the movie. The closer we juxtapose them together, it adds a layer of what is he up to? But that's a little too late. There were really two options that I felt worked, and I have gone for the most extreme of the two. I'm putting it after Obi-Wan tells Anakin to spy on the Emperor, and before Anakin whines to Padme. It falls right on the act break. It makes the Jedi's request seem like even more of a betrayal of trust. And now, when Anakin is complaining to Padme, it feels emotionally justified because of this layer of dread, which all sounds great, but really it's just the place that felt the best. So that's kind of been the structural stuff. I know it's a little bit dry, but it's helped to define some things that we'll get into next time. It's also helped to define some things that we got into last time, so you can go back and watch that one. And we've just got Anakin and the pivot and the rest of the movie and the endings to talk about. So the next video should be nice and dense. Yeah, I'm sorry. The first video was too many meaningless tweaks. This one was not enough. Hopefully the third one will be a good synthesis. I like the apology at the end. No? Sorry, it was a little bit dry and theoretical. I don't know if you noticed.